as I can within a very short period. Let's start with the thing that Gavin Williamson said in Parliament yesterday, that we had withdrawn our guidance and that because we accepted it was incorrect and that we were wrong. Let's be clear, the advice we issued on Saturday was correct. We believe that the advice we issued correct. And when the government contacted with us and said they were going to challenge us on this, we gave them a robust response. But the reality was the situation moved on. When we used Section 44 notices and recommended those use on Friday, we had no, Friday and Saturday, we had no, we were expecting on Monday that the situation would be completely different and all schools would have been open. All primary schools would have been open and secondary schools gearing up. That situation changed rapidly because of the actions that we took and because the actions that you took, that the members took in being strong and solid and sticking together and sending in those notices to employers. And let's be clear, we know that they had an impact because the government wouldn't have reacted as strongly as they have done if we hadn't have done that. And clearly the department's now sent out a letter to heads and issued a notice today saying that we've withdrawn the notice and that, blah-de-blah-de, everything goes back to normal. This is clearly not the situation. What we have said is the situation changed from Saturday. Saturday, we were facing a different situation. Now we face a separate decision. And clearly, we've put more new advice up on our website about Section 44. Clearly, Section 4, the law has not changed on Section 44 since Saturday. And people can still, as individuals, use Section 44 if they face imminent and serious danger. But what's happened is the situation has happened because the blanket opening of primaries is not the same. What we do know is we face a different situation in primary schools and a different situation in special schools and alternative provision, and we need to tackle those. And what we also know is that some schools, based on some of the guidance that the department have been given, widening the definition of what vulnerable means and widening the definition of what of which workers count as critical workers, have allowed potentially more pupils in than they have done. And what we've been saying to the department earlier, hammering the department earlier, and we had a meeting with scientists, which I'm not allowed to speak about, but I might give you a few hints. And what we were saying is, on the one hand, you're saying to the population, you must lock down. We're back to how we are in reality you're back to how we were in March. But we're not back to where we are in March because significant numbers of pupils are now being sent into schools by their parents, significant more numbers of pupils than were sent back in March. And clearly that puts a different situation. And it's certainly not the same because we're now dealing with a virus. This is considerably more transmissible than one before. It seems that it isn't worse. It seems that it doesn't have a worse infection rate, a worse infection effect on people, but it certainly moves more rapidly. And that's why we've got lockdown. So what is the logic of allowing schools to be open to large numbers of pupils and nurseries to be open? It just does not meet what the government are saying, which is about reducing transmission. And that's our basic stand, is what we're saying, along with other sister unions. And we've been piling in a load of letters. Just before I came on, I signed off a joint letter with the NEU asking for the scientific advice from Gavin Williamson. We sent a letter into Gavin Williamson yesterday raising questions about the numbers in schools and a range of other issues. And tonight we're working on, it may not get out till tomorrow, a rebuttal of the letter that the government have sent, the department have sent, claiming that we have gone back on what we said on Saturday. So all these actions we'll be doing and taking them there. We're also updating our advice on the website. We've just done an updated number of FAQs. We're now working on, following our National Schools Committee meeting together, we're doing some work about what we think should be maximum class sizes. We've just issued some more advice. We sent a new email out to early years members last night, and you may have seen me dancing across the airwaves. I was on the ITV News last night saying that nurseries should be closed. I recorded a piece for the BBC News today, and it should have been shown today, but one or two events are happening in the US, I think, which are keeping us off the agenda, but hopefully it'll be shown tomorrow. Kath, I could say loads more, but I would take up the whole hour or so we're on here, and I'll leave it there, and I'll try and answer as many questions as I can. I hope I didn't ramble too much, but the adrenaline is flowing at the moment, it's fair to say. So thank you.
Great, thanks very much for that, John. I'd now like to bring in Glenn Williams, our regional convener. Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks very much, Kath, and thanks, John. I think you're doing an incredible job under incredibly difficult circumstances. I dread to think what some of the scientists think our members do on a daily basis, but I would hazard a guess that they haven't got a clue. So my name's Glenn Williams. We're in two hats probably. One is your North West Regional Convener, and we are the biggest region, and I'm sure John, from a national perspective, will vouch for we're the best. We're certainly the loudest, and I'd like to pay tribute particularly to Pam Howard, who's taken the North West line extremely strongly in a national position as chair of the National Schools Committee. But my other role is to chair the National Committee of Local Government, under which school falls. And I can tell you, some of the national meetings I've been to, even today, the issues that have come up at my branch, in our region, and across the 4 nations and across all 12 regions are almost exactly the same. And what it means is that we have thousands and thousands of members. Most branches, their largest proportion of single group membership is within schools. The anxiety levels are incredibly high. And that's entirely down to the ridiculous pace of change imposed on us by an uncaring and out of touch central government. So in terms of, I do want to give the assurance that we've had hundreds and hundreds, as Kath suggested, hundreds of all legitimate questions, which tells me there's a massive amount of anxiety around there, and you will get a response at some stage very soon to all of those. John's also pointed you to some of the frequently asked questions that will be put on the UNISON national website, and I'm sure through Keith and others and Connor, they'll be replicated on the Northwest Regional site. So I just wanted to cover 3 key areas really. 4 areas. One, to say I am incredibly proud of the Northwest Regional's response so far. I think this is the 3rd meeting in 4 days we've had, arranged by Pam, Kath and Keith. No other region, I would hazard a guess, is managing to give that amount of support to our members. So I'm really proud of our response, and I'm also conscious and I'm proud that nationally, the lead that we've taken here will be followed in terms of hopefully the facility to have a virtual meeting on a national platform, hopefully next week. John may want to come back to that later. But the 3 areas I wanted to cover really was the overriding and fundamental importance of risk assessments. I've just come off a local schools meeting where senior officers of the council I happen to operate in weren't that clear whether or not schools had to review risk assessments. And we were pointing out very, very firmly, as you should all do, this virus is different. It's a variant which is different. It's more virulent. That's the first point. And therefore, risk assessment should be reviewed. Secondly, even Boris Johnson has accepted that children, primary school children, early years, are vectors of this new variant virus. Even he has accepted that. So the scientific evidence has changed. So whatever the questions are, I'm fairly confident that we'll be able to say your first port of call should be to have a look and access what should be online if you're in a school, the risk assessment that should have been updated along those 2 lines. So most of which you'll hear today, I will be saying the foundation to this is to have access to a reviewed and up-to-date risk assessment, which should be made available. The second point really is about clinically extremely vulnerable, previously known as shielding, and not to be confused with clinically vulnerable, which is a different category. It's fairly safe to say that unless it's in the 61 pages that Kath alluded to earlier that I have not read, that the clinically extremely vulnerable, for staff particularly, status has referred to where we were in March. So the old-fashioned shielding comes back into play, and the easiest way to explain it is if you are sent a letter from the NHS or your GP stating that you are clinically extremely vulnerable and you're a member of staff, then you should not be in work, but you can be at work. If you are able to work from home in some capacity, you should receive full pay remuneration. However, depending on the role that you undertake, if you have the letter stating that you are CEV, clinically extremely vulnerable, and you cannot work from home, you should not be forced, coerced, manipulated, encouraged to go to work. That is the advice that that is currently live on the government website, and I'm hoping that will be ratified when we finally get the advice on CEV. And then the other thing I wanted to say is be particularly careful around pregnant women, because the actual, certainly what I've been applying in the region and in my branches, that if there are pregnant women, they are automatically CEV. However, if you read the guidance, it actually says you are clinically extremely vulnerable if you're a pregnant woman who also has significant heart disease, congenital or otherwise. Now, we would argue it's a very, very stupid employer who would risk a pregnant woman's life if they forced her to come into work. So what I would suggest, if you're in that situation, you are entitled to an individual risk assessment as well as the risk assessment for the school. So the foundation stone for this is to go back to the risk assessment. The third and final area I wanted to draw your attention to is any threats of the removal of sick pay. You must report to your branch as soon as possible. I think we've heard today that the funding arrangements for nurseries and early years provision has changed, which give access to the potential for furlough. I won't go into the details, but it basically means if you think it's risky, chances are it is. So you must access the risk assessment, and if it's still not clear, or if they're refusing to give you access to that risk assessment, then you must get in touch with the branch. We've got access to some fantastic expertise. We're the biggest region, we're the strongest region, and we will demand answers. So they're the three areas I wanted to cover, but just wanted to try and allay some of the anxiety. Is that there's many, many people, hundreds of thousands of people working their way through the mud that is some of the guidance. And thanks to the expertise we'll have, we will get that cascaded down to you as quickly as possible. So thank you for the people who've put this meeting together, and I hope that you'll get your questions answered. Thanks, Kath.
Thanks very much, Glenn. And Glenn's quite right, the updated guidance does refer to CEV and pregnant members also. I'd now like to bring in Pam Howard, who is the chair of our National School Sector Committee. Thanks, Pam.
Thanks, Kath. First, apologies. Some of what I say might be repeated of what colleagues have said, but that's the price you pay for being the closing act, I'm afraid. Some of what I'm saying is already said, but I'm going to repeat it because it's really important that we get our message across, and it's really important that we show how, the concerns of our members in the Northwest, and that is mirrored across the country. Because we're now in a national lockdown, but it feels very different to the lockdown that we had in March. We've had many concerns raised by anxious support staff within schools, and it's totally understandable. We've got rising numbers of infections, we've got a new variant, we've got huge increases in hospital admissions and deaths, and that's without the impact of the Christmas break. We've still got to see that. So during the last lockdown, schools were open for children of key workers and vulnerable pupils, and all staff, teachers and support staff together, they stepped up and we kept schools open for those pupils, supporting home learning, supporting the national effort to help the NHS, and we drove the virus down. We were part of that national lockdown, and we made an impression on the virus. But this time we're seeing increased numbers of pupils attending school. And let's be clear, we do want the children in school, that our children have a right to receive that education, and we want to support that, but it has to be done in a safe way for all. At this present time, many of our members are telling us that they just don't feel safe. So we've been told by members issues of large class sizes, some saying that up to 70% of children are attending. Some have said that all support staff are being required to be in school, whilst many teachers are able to work from home. And this isn't a battle between support staff and teachers. We want to work together, but the government guidance is very clear. If you can work from home, you should do so. That's the point of a lockdown, less people out and about to reduce the spread of the virus. But is it right that children are being looked after by support staff? I'm not being disrespectful to our teaching assistants, who are highly trained professional members of staff, but they are not teachers. We've also had very concerning reports of school admin staff being told that they have to spend time in classrooms to supervise children. If we've got high numbers of children in school, shouldn't they be being taught by a qualified teacher? Or not least, have our support staff being treated with the same equity and also have minimum contact with others? And we will hear the argument that many other workplaces are open, but a school environment is very different to many other workplaces. Social distancing is nigh on impossible to implement. School sites don't have the space to ensure the distancing that's needed, and high numbers of staff and pupils spend long periods of time working closely together. And now even the government are listening to the scientific evidence and have concerns regarding how children can spread the virus. We need the government to give us clear guidance on schools, on the appropriate number of children who should be in a class. We need to revert back to the strict use of bubbles, being firm with the numbers inside those bubbles, and to not have some members of staff being told, as they are being now, that they have to work across different classes and different areas within schools. We cannot have support staff being put at any more risk because some staff are working from home, or we've got staff shortages because of illness. And so ultimately those staff are the ones that could be taking the virus to their homes and out into the wider community. It totally defeats the purpose of a lockdown. So due to no guidance from the government on the specific pupil number per class, along with the change in the criteria on the definition of a vulnerable child, meaning all children with a education, health and care plan can attend school, there are now many more children attending, which makes a huge difference to this lockdown. There's also the issue of many workplaces insisting on people attending work. So parents are having to rely on schools for childcare, and the heads are trying to assist and support families, but this will potentially make the lockdown not as effective as we need it to be right now, increase numbers in schools with more risk to staff and the children. Sadly, we've also had reports of some support staff who are extremely clinically vulnerable. As Glenn said, those people that are deemed to be shielding. They've been told that they've got to attend work or take unpaid leave. This is callous. The most vulnerable being forced to work. That alongside no updated guidance for our black members, even though nothing has changed regarding the risk of those people catching the virus and becoming extremely unwell. The governments haven't produced what is needed to advise school leaders. We take all concerns raised by our members seriously. In 2 days, we've received, as we said, hundreds and hundreds of questions in our emails from members across our region. And unfortunately, myself and colleagues, we can't respond individually to all of those questions tonight. But as we say, they will be, hopefully we will cover many of the topics, and we'll take some more questions shortly if we can. But we encourage members to contact your local branch, to get support from your branch officers and your representatives, and we'll be there as well to support those branches in advising our members. Myself and colleagues on the National Committee continue to raise members' concerns, and we will continue to work with our sister unions in taking those concerns to the government, working with our national officers, with John and his team. We need updated guidance for our schools, and we need it urgently, in particular on class sizes, risks and protections for those staff who may be more vulnerable due to age, health or their ethnicity. Northwest branches have made it clear to me that they are not willing to let the government drag its feet as far as our members' safety is concerned. As I say, we'll produce a list of the questions and the themes that you've given to us. We'll give you our responses and make sure that that information is up on our regional website as soon as possible. And you can access all the national information as well on the main UNISON website. Our members have really, really worked hard since March last year. They've got on with keeping schools open, but now the risks and the anxieties are much higher, and we need to do, and we will do, all we can to protect them and the school and the children as well within the schools. That our members have got our support, and we're there for everybody that needs it.
Great, thanks very much for that, Pam. We have got some questions in the chat. The first one, is there an official limit on the amount of children allowed in each classroom? John, do you have any updates on that?
Well, according to the guidance that appears to come out, and again, I've only skimmed it today, so I need to be a bit careful on exactly what I say, is the government seem to be suggesting there aren't. We're clear that in March we gave some guidance around of around 15 as a school maximum, but clearly that works in when you've got a maximum of 30. If you're a small primary school where you're used to having small classes, you'd want to be looking at about 50%. So as you probably saw me looking away, I was just signing off, putting that up as a frequently asked question up on our website. So we'll be going back to the advice we gave out in March, which was about that we should only have 15 people in classes and half day. And we know that other unions will be taking a similar approach. I suspect some of the teaching unions might be a bit less specific, but that's probably because half their members are at home, whereas we know a lot of our members are in school, and we need to make sure that our members are safe. So we will be recommending about 50% of the normal class size.
Great, thanks for that, John. And again, I skim read and I couldn't find any ratios or quantity per bubble within the guidance. I just want to make sure I've not missed something. But yeah, I mean, we had our National School Sector Committee this afternoon, and the committee members were quite clear, as was John, that we need to have the minimum amount of children in the classroom as possible. And even if it's not necessarily a number, a percentage dependent on the number of children contained within each particular school. So thanks for that. The next question is, what if you care for a CEV family member? Glenn, would you want to come in on that?
Yeah, happy to start that. I mean, I think the first thing you should be asking if it's a school, the head teacher, is to have that considered in your individual risk assessment. The second point is that if we have gone back to the March CEV guidance, John's looking to come in, then it means that the only protection you're going to be offered in terms of your employment is negligible. If I'm being honest, you'll be expected to apply social distancing, but you will not be empowered to do anything other than work at home if you can. It's not going to provide you any particular safety. If you're a member of staff who is CV, interestingly, just looking at the final question, you will be in priority 1 for the vaccine as and when that becomes available. So the regulations and guidance as of March will be reapplied unless that has changed in the guidance that came out today for the CEV.
Thanks, Glenn. And John, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just because we've been having any discussions with the local government association who look after who we bargain with for school staff pay terms and conditions. The national pay terms and conditions are negotiated between ourselves and the local government association. And what we've agreed with them is yesterday they reissued they updated their guidance, basically saying that all the previous NJC circulars we've been issuing apply, but we asked them in particular to highlight the 2 circulars from March, which take us back to a much more progressive position. They've now sent that out, and we'll be sending that out to branches, highlighting those 2 particular circulars, which do talk about treating clinically vulnerable people the same way as clinically extremely vulnerable people. Although when they were written, they use the language of shielding and not of those particular issues. So I think those ought to be helpful. We do know that some employers say, oh yeah, but they're only guidance, but nonetheless they're guidance recommended by their local government association as well.
That's great, thanks for that, John. The next question is, I have to cross between bubbles, should that happen? Pam, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, our advice with this is very clear. The contact that you have in school should be minimum, so that shouldn't be happening. The staff should be rotated and deployed in a way that it takes away that risk of staff having to be put across bubbles. So that is something that you would need to raise with the management of the school, raise your concerns, ask to see risk assessments, and contact your branch for that individual support.
Great, thanks for that, Pam. The next question is, I have underlying health issues and I'm not allowed to work from home. School are not protecting its support staff in a way that they could be considered appropriate. Do I have to attend? Well, I think on that it would depend on which group you actually fall into. If you fall into the CEV group, then obviously you would have a shielding letter. If you fall into other groups, we go back to what Glenn and John and Pam have alluded to before. That is down to individual risk assessments. You need your school risk assessment, you need your own individual risk assessment, and if necessary, also an occupational health risk assessment. I don't know if anybody else wants to come in on that.
Only to point out, you've missed question 4, Kath.
Oh, sorry, I guess because you alluded to it before. So it was, why aren't school staff being prioritised for the vaccine? And John, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I do. One thing I think I can say from the meeting we had this afternoon is that every person on that call, be it employers, being it unions, being it whoever else was on the call, all the stakeholders, everyone said that education staff ought to be a priority because they're being asked to go into situations where they're potentially at risk. So everyone made that appeal to the department. What the department, the scientists basically are saying is it's the decision of the JCIV or JICV. There's a specific independent group called the Joint Group on the Joint Independent Committee on Vaccination, that's what it's called, and they're the ones who make the decision. At the moment, they have only prioritised a certain number of groups. They are now looking at who potentially others might be prioritised, but in a sense, it's not a decision that the department make or we make. Obviously, we'll be lobbying, we'll be pressing for them to do. We're circulating petitions about it. I think we just put one up on our Facebook page, our national Facebook page, which if you're not on, it's at UNISON in Schools. Always worth adding your name there, and our Twitter account at UNISON in Schools if you want to follow those as well. But yes, we are pressing as hard as we can, but it's the decision of an independent body.
That's great, thanks for that, John. The next question we have in the chat is, where do we stand on personal care? I'm not quite sure what it's alluding to, whether it's PPE, which in schools, yes, you should have the correct PPE equipment. Pam, do you want to come in further on that? I mean, I know we should have the masks, the aprons, obviously the gloves if you're in special needs school. In secondary schools, you should be wearing masks in public areas, on corridors, etc. I know certainly in Manchester, a lot of our schools, or the majority of our schools actually, have got PPE regardless of which sector they cover, be it primary, secondary or special needs. All staff are allowed to wear equipment if they so wish. Pam, do you want to come in a bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean, the question doesn't really tell you what kind of setting it's in, or the circumstances, but we would say that anything that you're delivering personal care with should have an assessment, a risk assessment to go with it, and that depends on the employee's personal circumstances as well, what their risks are if they're being expected to do certain duties. But again, it's one the branch can assist, your local branch can assist with, but it will be asked for the risk assessment that covers whatever type of personal care that you're delivering. I think Keith wants to come in on it as well, Kath.
Yeah, Keith, please.
No, I don't want to really come into that. I'm monitoring my own phone as well as watching this. I mean, one of the questions that are starting to come in thick and fast is the issue on special schools. I don't know if John or Pam want to give us an update on that, the latest information on special schools, because that is a real problem for us with the vulnerability of the children and also the members in there. So, I mean, the latest information, just that I'm monitoring my own phone because I've been contacted by quite a lot of members this evening.
Yeah, thanks. John, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, quickly. I mean, as I said, we have got advice up on the website on that, so people can look at the advice, the specific advice given to in special schools. I think one of the things that we're really concerned about is the number of the government having defined vulnerable pupils and said everyone, anyone who has an EHC plan should be classed as vulnerable and therefore should be in. And we're quite clear that's not the case. What we should be doing is we should be looking at pupils and identifying whether we think they need to be in or whether actually they could be working online or from home. So we are just about to agree a statement with the NEU and GNB on this one. As you see, we like to spread our fancies wider, and on this one we'll be issuing joint guidance about what we think is our definition of what vulnerable should be, and it'll expand on what I've just said. So we're absolutely aware that special schools are particular, and not just special schools, it's AP as well, because clearly there are the issues of behaviour and the ability to social distance, and the way that pupils in AP can approach staff and deliberately present with behavioural problems, I think it's something we need to address. So we're carrying on, we're working on that. When we get questions in, when we get issues in, then we try to put up additional guidance on the website for them.
Thanks for that, John. And like John said, guidance certainly went out from branches to members on Monday with regards to updates on special needs schools. And as John said, we keep updating the FAQs as and when we get more information. The next question is, why aren't we getting weekly testing like carers? John, I think you've already covered that really, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, the situation on testing was clearly, we expected we would be most of this past couple of weeks, we'd be focusing on mass testing. And we've been calling for introduction of mass testing to schools since March. And when I went back into my office, that brief period when we were allowed to go into our offices, I found on my desk a whole series of papers about mass testing in South Korea. And I'd done an international discussion where I'd heard from a South Korean doctor how they ran through their testing process, and that was in March, April time. And what you see is in South Korea, they've had 839 deaths. They have a population of 50 million people, and that's how to run a proper test, trace, and isolate scheme. I mean, I suspect that some of the ways they do it are a little bit more ruthless than we might accept, but nonetheless, they had a clear testing plan. We have failed in this country to do that. Having said that, we began to get to a situation where we may be able to actually do some testing. So we will be able to, in schools, run a potential testing program, but there's a number of things that we want clarification on. One, this is a potentially increase in additional work. Who's going to do this? There's two, we've always said that this is, as far as we can see, this is links in with the work that people do around the administration of medicines and healthcare needs for pupils. So our national guidance, which funny enough, we agreed after discussions with Michael Gove, if you remember him, some years ago, is that it should be voluntary, and where it isn't, where people are prepared to do it, they have to be fully trained. They have to feel that they're competent before they go on this. So there's a series of steps that need to be stepped through, rather than the rushed approach that the government tried to do just before Christmas. Now we have a little bit more time now because testing is because we don't have so many pupils in, far too many, but not as many. So I think we're now beginning to engage on the process of testing. And as I said, I think we do need to do that. However, what we also need to make sure is at this time, it is not a replacement for isolation, because what we think the Department for Education want to do is say, okay, it will use these tests, you have it, you're okay to come in work until you prove negative. Now, what we know from those lateral flow tests is absolutely they're better than nothing. And it's really important that we recognise that. But there are some flaws, and they don't always give the exact result. So we should be using them, but we also need to be careful. And that's why we need to run alongside the isolation of bubbles the way we are now. And until we're confident that the testing program is up and running properly, at that stage, we can then move to a situation where testing allows more people to come into schools.
Thanks for that, John. And the next question, and I think we're going to go back to John again because you've already alluded to this earlier, is what happens now regarding people who have forwarded the Section 44 letters?
Well, as I said, I mean, the situation's moved on since Saturday, and people who obviously submitted questions on Saturday were doing so on the basis of the situation in Saturday. The situation's changed. So now, if people are now in a situation where, as a result of the new situation where primaries should not be open, if people are now in a situation where they still feel that they're in imminent and serious danger, they're in a slightly different situation from Saturday, then they still have exactly the same rights they had on Saturday. So people still have the right to use Section 44 if they so wish. So people need to contact their branch, say to the branch, I think they need to do it, but it would be sensible that if people want to do that, they think about submitting, they think about doing a new one as opposed to one that's already been submitted. But actually, we also ought to be going back to the basics of trade unionism, which is talking to the branches, getting branches involved in negotiation, getting branches, if needs be, putting in potentially local disputes if the employers aren't moving. Section 44 has always been our last resort, because it isn't the basis on what we'd want to do things. We only did it over the weekend because we had to take emergency steps. What we need to do is go back to how we've always done, which is getting our branches negotiating with employers and improving their risk assessments, just as Glenn said. So Section 44, it's still there, but we don't need to be doing it until we've dealt with the situation at a local level. And Glenn might be able to say more on that.
Glenn, would you like to come in?
No, just to echo what John said, really, which is that in terms of the first application of the blanket Section 44, we should be celebrating the fact that it worked. The announcement at 8 o'clock on Monday didn't come out of nowhere. It was because of concerted effort by ourselves and the NEU and other bodies. But I think John's also right, is that the legal rights that we have enshrined for employees who feel at risk, it remain there. I think we've just got to be quite cute and cautious about it not being presented as a collective issue on behalf of the union under Section 44, because it isn't, and we leave ourselves wide open. And as I said right at the start, if it feels risky to anybody who's listening to this, chances are it is. And to go on to the next question, question 9, if I might, Kath, before anybody else comes in on it. If that feels risky, then it is risky. I don't think the government could be any clearer. You should not be going out of your home. And if the work can be done from home, that's what it should be done. So we're back to the first lockdown. So whoever asked the first question around school office staff, my lines, I think quite simplistically, we're back to where we were. So it's going to be a very interesting school head teacher or principal who explains to me why an office staff member has to physically be in school. And there may well be things like opening of posts. Well, guess what? They have a facility called redirecting the post. Get it sent somewhere else and it can be dealt with it either by another member of staff or at home even. But I think the response to that, some schools there will be tasks that can only be undertaken in a building. But the government line, one of the few government lines I think is clear, is that we've got to stay at home. It's a lockdown. You shouldn't be going on public transport. So that would be my response to question 9. There may be variations on that from colleagues, Kath.
Thanks for that, Glenn. I'm not quite sure how this works if everyone can see the question, so I'll read it out just in case. It's what is the current guidance for school office staff? First lockdown, we were not allowed in the school building as per government guidance and had to work from home. This current lockdown, the office staff are expected to be in work on a rota basis. Oh, right, okay, so you can see the questions. I wasn't sure how it worked. Again, I think that's something that members need to take up with their branches, because if you do not need to be in work, you should not be in work. That is the government guidance, and the majority of administration work can be undertaken from home. So you need to be really clear. You need to get in touch with your branch and get them to take it up with the head teacher. Keith, do you want to come in?
Yeah, the two other select workforce that have been having difficulty this week, and that's the cleaners and the catering staff. The cleaners themselves are not being put on a rota. They're expected to come to work every day, and we believe that this is going to be a risk factor, and we're actually saying to a number of schools, a number of academies, revisit the risk assessment. You do not expect the cleaners to come in every day, but because the schools are at full capacity in certain areas, it's putting a lot of pressure on the cleaning workforce, and they're working flat out. The same with the catering staff. There's all kinds of strange things going on at the present moment. Some are being put on furlough. Some being told to work, to be at home and maybe not be paid. And I think it's a case of we've got to get it's a collective responsibility from the heads, and also the branches need to be informed of what's going on with the cleaners and the catering staff, because at the present moment we're getting some strange kind of responses or questions from the cleaners, especially the rota system and when they're expected to go into work. Usually, they're being told to go in 5 o'clock in the morning before everything else is up and running. I don't know how the heck they're getting into work. They're either walking, because there's hardly any buses knocking around now. So, I mean, the pressure is on the whole of the school workforce. And I think it's like the coordination and the communication between all the support staff working closely with the branches. We're able to get through this difficult situation at the present moment.
Thanks for that, Keith. The next question is, if you refuse to give out tests, can you get disciplined? I'm assuming this is referring to the lateral flow testing in secondary schools. John, do you want to come in on that? I know we've kind of held back on guidance for this at the moment because of everything else that's been going on, haven't we?
So, Kath, I missed exactly what the question was because my Wi-Fi went funny.
It says, if you refuse to give out tests, can you get disciplined?
Well, the thing is, you can't be forced to give out tests. You have to be the guidance, the government guidance, which we hopefully, if we haven't we will be putting up on. I think it's definitely in the guidance on the special needs guidance we gave up. It definitely says that. We've printed out the specific paragraph in the government guidance which says that you have to be a volunteer, so they can't force you to hand out tests, so they shouldn't be doing that. And if they do, you need to talk to your branch, and your branch will point them in the right direction.
Thanks for that, John. And I think as well with the lateral testing, I know for the secondary schools, the students are supposed to undertake the test themselves, which is going to be extremely difficult. As a mother, I know I've had to do one on my teenager, and it wasn't pleasant at all. But it's how John says, it's how it's all recorded, how we ensure that the test has been carried out properly, that the student knows what they want to do, that we've got the correct environment to keep everything sterile. So again, the guidance from the government is practically non-existent, and we are waiting further guidance. You know, they have said volunteers can go into schools to help out, but again, how do we monitor that? So that one is really difficult, and that's going to be updated as and when we have more information. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that. No? Okay, thanks. There aren't any more questions in the chat at the moment. Keith, have you got any more that you've had sent to you that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, it's mainly about other areas like breakfast clubs and after school clubs. Believe it or not, they're still going ahead, and I think the same staff are being asked to lead on breakfast clubs and also the after school clubs, and I think it's a crossover again. It's a bit like the bubbles, where we're getting involved in a whole host of areas where the cross infection can take place. So I think again, we've got to get strong on this and get the risk assessment sorted out. But importantly is to understand the breakfast clubs. Yes, they've got to be involved, but they've got to be quite limited, and you do not cross over into other areas. Because like I said, if you're going to do breakfast clubs, you can't just go in there and go into the classroom with another set of children and then do the after school club as well. So I think schools are still thinking that they're working on a normal basis when we're not in a normal environment at the present moment, which I'm really surprised about.
Thanks for that, Keith. John, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think, I mean, heads are in a really difficult position, and we have to be supportive where we can. I mean, obviously some of them, well, we won't go on that, I mean, some of them can be difficult, we know that, but most heads, they're there to educate and teach children, and that's at the forefront of their mind. And I think the conflict between their desire to do the best for their pupils, the same way our desire is, actually sometimes undermines the fundamental. And what we need to remember, and we keep saying this is about people staying at home. This is about reducing risks, and stopping the spread of the virus. And that's why I've done a lot of press in the recent days about nurseries, because there is no logic why nurseries should be open when you've closed reception classes in primary schools. There's a very similar school age, and it doesn't matter if the scientists say, well, pupils don't spread them as much amongst themselves and they don't catch it so much. What you do get is you get parents coming to the gate, and what you do is you get mixture of people, and that increases the risk of transmission. And we get staff wandering around in something. I had an email this morning, a couple of emails this morning, and one was from a nursery worker whose 5 colleagues and her are now in isolation, all have COVID and now all in isolation, and that's directly as a result of them going into work. We had another parent as well who has an asthmatic child and is vulnerable themselves, who don't want to take their kid into work, but actually their nursery is saying to them, if you don't take your kid into work, we're going to give your place to someone else, because otherwise we'll lose the funding, and we need the funding because the government have shifted the whole model of funding. So you only get your proper funds if your places are full. So people have been placed on ridiculously difficult decisions as a result of a government that is making inadequate, last minute and inconsistent decisions, and we just have to keep challenging the government. And we have done. We did it on Saturday over the weekend. We pushed them back. We need to be strong and work together, and collectively we can keep pushing the government to make better and better decisions. But this is also a government with an 80-seat majority who seem to be arrogant and seem to not listen to the wise counsel that ourselves and other unions are making. And it's just very frustrating.
Thanks, John. The next question is, school catering staff frequently being asked to breach bubbles by providing meals to all children. What is the advice to catering staff on this? Who would like to come in on that one?
I'll take that one, Kath. I mean, it's just from the question, it's difficult to understand how they're actually delivering those meals and what process has been put in place. But it has to be managed in a way that the catering staff are not having that direct contact with the children, and something, a plan must be in place so that the meals are either delivered and collected by the staff in that classroom working with that bubble, or the children go into the dining room and enter in a way that they're not having the close contact with the staff. That really shouldn't be an issue, and those staff should be raising the concerns that they've got and asking for the risk assessment. That duty, that process should be detailed in a risk assessment, so there isn't any chance of those staff having to have that the over contact with the children.
Thanks, Pam. Keith, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to expand on that, and I think one of the concerns that we have had is a number of private firms not providing the PPE to the staff, and that is one area where we've been challenging the private firms and actually considering whether or not we take action against them. So I think we need to ensure that if you are in the meals service, make sure, as Pam said, your risk assessment's up to date, but also get the PPE. We have heard that some heads kindly have provided the PPE to the catering staff when clearly the private firms have failed miserably in actually providing a safe environment for our members. So again, we need to work closely on this to understand what is actually going on with some of the catering services.
Thanks for that, Keith. The next question is rotas. Should they include all staff? Some are on rotas and some are working flat out, dependent generally on their role. Again, that's quite a wide question, so it would really depend on whether you're referring to all support staff being on a rota or whether you're referring to all staff within the school being on the rota. And again, if rotas are in place, then the head teacher should be looking at those that it's consistent for all staff where possible and allowing them to work from home where possible. And if there's not a need for them to be in school, then they shouldn't be in school. I think that's something that you would really need to take up with your individual branch so that they can get more information and take it up on your behalf. Does anybody else want to come in?
No, Kath, I just think these types of questions just highlight the main concern that we've got and the lack of the guidance that is leading to an increase of children being in school. We didn't have these types of questions when we were in the first lockdown, and I could categorically say that I know that our support staff members were keeping schools run with a lot of the teaching staff at home at that time. The problem we've got now is the support staff are being expected to, in the main, keep the schools running, while teaching staff are allowed to be at home, and that is the right thing to do. If they can do the job from home, do it from home. The issue is the clear guidance isn't there, and there's excessive numbers of children in school, and that is causing anxiety for our staff. If the government get their act together and give us the guidance that we need so that head teachers have got it clear, so they're not having to make these difficult decisions, because head teachers aren't doing this out of malice or just to, to crack a whip with people. We know that the majority of our head teachers are fair, but they need the guidance to work with, and we need it so we can advise staff. The problem is there is currently too many children attending school because of all the ways round the criteria for being a key worker child or a vulnerable child, and that is actually now starting to show. The press within the Northwest region today are reporting that key workers are saying that they cannot get their children into school because schools are saying they've got too many kids in. these are parents that work within the NHS are now saying there's no place for their child. The government need to get their act together, else everything is going to fall apart, because this is not working.
Thanks, Pam. And I think it's also worth reminding ourselves that in the last lockdown, many of our support staff were in schools during the holidays, even though they were only on term time only contracts. They were keeping schools going. They were looking after the key worker and vulnerable children, and they should be applauded for that, and that should not be forgotten. The next question is, what's the position on teaching assistants being asked to cover classes where teachers are absent? It's causing a lot of stress and anxiety. I think with that, we need to know what level of teaching assistant we're actually looking at. Hilters can cover classes. We do know that, but other levels of teaching assistants shouldn't be covering classes. We can appreciate the stress that's putting you under, and I know John wants to come in on that.
Great. We have a specific section on that on the website. There's an FAQ. If you go to the UNISON's website and go to the education page and the section on thing, and what we said is our clear position that only suitably experienced teaching assistants should be asked to lead classes, and then only in situations known about in advance. Suitably experienced teaching assistants should only be those whose job description already includes this occasional responsibility, including Hilters working at levels 4 and 5 according to the NJC job profile, and who paid at the appropriate grade. And it goes on a bit, but I would recommend teaching assistants go onto the website of that. We are about to engage. I've just spent, there's a bit of money left over in my budget last year, so I've just engaged with the University of College London, who have a specialist unit who work on teaching assistants, and we're going to do some work looking at what teaching assistants ought to be doing at this time, because clearly there's a fabulous role for teaching assistants to do on catch-up over the coming period, because we know that particularly disadvantaged children and young people are going to suffer during this time. So proper use of teaching assistants in that catch-up is going to be absolutely really important over the next few months. What we don't want to see them doing is being put in positions where they're being asked to do things where they're not properly trained, and when they're being put under stress and strain. So, but more of that, I suspect that piece of work may be delayed because we're in the current bit of lockdown. But look out for that, because clearly we've already got quite a bit of advice out there about teacher assistants, and we're going to do some more work over the next year, because we need to update the guidance we've been issuing recently.
Thanks for that, John. Now we've got one question left in the chat that I'd ask Glenn, would he very quickly respond, because I'm just mindful of the time. The question is, why are CEV staff in schools having to accept SSP because they can't go into school or work? It's disgusting when other CEV get 80% furlough.
Yeah, SSP being statutory sick pay. The bottom line is that should not be happening. There was previous NJC guidance that John referred to earlier that some employers are going to have to accept, and I'm paraphrasing, that some employees will be sat at home unable to work. Now, I'm not sure what sort of school that is. I'm not sure whether it's a private school, academy, whether it's early years. But again, given the funding announcements that have been made today, that should not be happening. Clinically extremely vulnerable is now very clear that you're entitled to be. You don't have to be in work to be at work, but if it can't be facilitated, you should not suffer a detriment. And again, I'd be amazed if the guidance that's come out today changes that. So where that is happening, it's crucial that the person gets in touch with local branch and we challenge it.
Thanks, Glenn. The final question was, will this be streamed and available for playback after the end of the meeting? And the answer to that is yes. So I'd just like to thank all the panel members for attending this evening. And we hope we've managed to encapsulate.
Can I just say one thing? We are organising a hazard safety courses or training event and an open forum like this towards the end of January. We're trying to bring that forward, where we're going to discuss the risk assessments, how it operates, and we're looking at trying them out the end of January up to Saturday morning, for members to actually come in to understand risk assessment and understand how they can actually be informative on that for themselves and also within their workplace. So please look out for that information that comes out fairly quickly.
Okay,
next couple of days.
I'm just really mindful we've got 2 minutes left, so it's just to thank everyone for attending. John, very quickly.
Very quickly, I just want to say that we'll be doing a national version of these hopefully next week, which will include advice on special needs and early years and other things as well. Thanks.
Right, and Glenn, one more very quickly.
One sense, really proud to tell you that throughout this meeting there's been around about 1,500 members watching this. This is by far the biggest meeting our region's ever done, so well done.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, so thanks everyone for coming. I hope we've managed to encapsulate as many of your questions and queries as possible this evening. We will do an FAQ like we said earlier. As John's mentioned, we are going to do a National School Support Staff meeting next week, and the details of that will be provided as soon as possible. So on behalf of the panel, we'd like to thank you all for attending this evening, and good night and thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.